In my last video, I talked about Denver, Colorado, and how I had asked Mr. Catalyst if he had a girlfriend, and he basically told me no. I'm going to pick up with the story here. If you're interested, I'll link all the videos down below so you can catch up if you would like. So after I asked him that, I was reasonably confident that we were going to stay in contact, but what happened next surprised me, that Mr. Catalyst basically fell off the face of the earth for a little while. Knowing what I know now, that actually does not surprise me at all. But at the time, I was very confused. Once again, this was a person I knew from my past. It was not someone that was seemingly a random person. It wasn't until he fell off the face of the earth that I realized, oh, I really like this person, even though we haven't seen each other in 35 plus years. It was almost like my heart kind of dropped a little bit. And it didn't necessarily affect my trip, and that's one of the things that I want to drive home, is even though I was having these intense messaging sessions, these intense connections, and I felt a spiritual connection. You can go back to my video where I drove from Flagstaff to Albuquerque and had a spiritual marriage type of experience. So I was having a lot of experiences that I couldn't explain, and this was feeding into my desire to meet up with him when I finally arrived in Philadelphia. I was really enjoying driving around the United States of America, and I realized like what an amazing opportunity that was for me. I had driven across the United States before, back in 2003, and I was driving from New York City to Los Angeles, and I made it in about 4 days. So it was definitely like a pedal to the metal experience, and it was totally different than the experience I was having at this point in time in 2019, where I could actually just take my time and enjoy the cities of the United States and enjoy what the United States has to offer. So my next stop was Rapid City, South Dakota, and it was almost like I was split in two. Like, I loved driving around and meeting people and being out there. And then, like, part of me was like, okay, well, where's Mr. Catalyst? Because we just had this pretty intense exchange in Denver, Colorado, messaging-wise. And then it seemed like he fell off the face of the earth. But I didn't contact him, and I was ready to let the whole situation go. Like, if he didn't contact me, I was not going to contact him. There was just something in me that said, don't do that. So I drove from Denver to Rapid City, South Dakota, my next stop, and I went up through Wyoming to do that. And it was so beautiful. I loved driving through Wyoming in September. The wind was crazy. I remember that. And I remember there were these two guys from Canada in this little sports car that just like totally passed me, because I just have a Nissan Versa Note. It's not exactly like the speediest car. And they just like zoomed past me, and they were just having such a good time with the sunroof down. It was fun. So that was the type of experience I was having, just like being in Wyoming, which I had never been in Wyoming before, and checking it out, meeting people. I remember going to Rapid City, South Dakota, and like I had never been there. And it was cool because the people were like really different than what I was used to. And it was just like fun talking to people and just getting to know like a different part of the country. I went to Mount Rushmore, which was close to Rapid City. I didn't really spend much time there, maybe a couple of hours, but that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go. For myself, I just found it was beautiful, but I found it just to be a little bit too touristy. So I found this park, and it was a beautiful September day. It was during the week, so I never would have had this time if I was in either California or Pennsylvania working. Like, who has time to do this during the week? But this was a little bit of a gentle wake-up call for me in terms of how we live our lives here in the United States. And unlike Mount Rushmore, where there were a lot of guests and a lot of people walking around, there was almost no one there. And I got out of my car, I just started walking around, and I found these ducks, and I was like, oh my God, they're so cute. They were ducks like right by the pond. And I just sat there for a little bit, and I didn't do anything. I just sat in the silence of this park, and I just watched the ducks, which I give me a minute because I know that sounds a little bit strange, but I just wanted to, as a human, get as close to the ducks as possible without disturbing them. And I was able to do that, and I just sat with the ducks for about 30 minutes. About 30 minutes, I'm just sitting there with these ducks. And I just thought, wow. And no alcohol or drugs or anything involved. I don't smoke pot. I'm not a pot smoker. So I was just naturally high on nature in the middle of Rapid City, South Dakota, in this beautiful park sitting with the ducks. And I just thought, this is what life is about, right? This is what I need to do more often. And I say that knowing how difficult that is for Americans to do. Like, I can't remember the last time I just went to a park and sat with the ducks, right? I mean, I think that's why people work so hard for retirement, so they can do these types of seemingly small activities. And so I will always have that experience with me, and I thought that was interesting because I have some beautiful pictures from Mount Rushmore, but I didn't really get too much out of that experience. But then when I went and sat with the ducks, that's what I always remember most about Rapid City, South Dakota. So I'm in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I drive to Bismarck, North Dakota. And I got to tell you this story. This is like the kind of stuff that was happening that was pretty cool. I'm not really like a big touristy person. I never go to cities and do the touristy stuff, but I thought this was pretty cool. So I'm driving and I'm going up to Bismarck, North Dakota, and I'm telling you, like, it's nothing but farmland. It's crazy. And there's, for me, because like I just was never raised on a farm, I know it's not crazy. So let me say that right now. But this happened and it was crazy for me. And I'm driving and there's like absolutely no cars and all farms, and there's this guy like just in the middle of the road, and he's like in an orange and white jumpsuit, almost like the orange is the new black, and he just like puts up his hand like this, you know, like to stop me. He's got like a little stop thing. I'm like, okay, and I couldn't figure out why, because like I didn't see anything. There's nothing to see. I was like, okay, well, is there road work or so? But I'm like, okay, well, let me just sit in my car. Remember, I still have my California license plates, and I was just sitting there for like 5 minutes, right, in the middle of nowhere, and I'm just wondering like what's going on. I'm like, should I even be stopped? I mean, should I just go? I mean, I didn't know. And so I just like kind of wave him over, and I just said, is there a reason like why I'm stopped here? And he said, oh, he was so nice. And he was just like, oh yeah, there's, you know, road work just over the other way. He's like, I'm so sorry, you know, it'll just be a few minutes. I'm like, okay, no problem. Like, I just wanted to know, because, you know, you're driving through these isolated areas as a woman, right? And I wanted to just put that in because it was such a nice experience traveling around as a woman. I think we always hear about the bad stuff, but never the good stuff. And you might say like, okay, well, that's just the way it's supposed to be. And I kind of agree, but he was so kind and considerate and extremely polite. And it wasn't lost on me that he was probably a prisoner of the North Dakota or South Dakota prison system. But his whew, but when I look back on it, I really appreciate his kindness and consideration, especially in light of my interaction with Mr. Catalyst, which in the long run, he was not a kind, considerate person. But this guy, in my interaction with him, really was. So all this time going from Denver, Colorado to Rapid City, South Dakota, didn't hear from Mr. Catalyst after he told me that he does not have a girlfriend. And then going from Rapid City, South Dakota to Bismarck, North Dakota, still don't hear from him. And at this point, like, I could feel my heart drop a little bit. And I definitely was a little bit sad, like I'm not gonna lie. But at the same time, I just knew, okay, well, I'm not gonna contact this guy, because there was just something in me that said don't do it. When I was in Bismarck, North Dakota, I got the best massage of my life. Oh my gosh, by Crystal. And if I can, I'm friends with her on Facebook still, and if I can find her information, I'll link it in the description below, in case you're in the area, because she is fabulous. She really is. And one of the things that she told me was that, and I hadn't said anything about my situation whatsoever, but one of the things that she told me was that she lived with her boyfriend. I had received a massage at her house, and they had actually reconnected via Facebook. They had known each other in the past, and I think dated for a little bit, had been out of contact for years, and then reconnected via Facebook. When I heard that, I didn't say anything about my situation, but I thought, oh, that's kind of coincidental. I wouldn't put that in the synchronicities category, but it did kind of hit me like, huh, that's kind of cool. Like, that worked out for her. Maybe it'll work out for me too. I mean, you know, maybe that's a little sign from the universe. I had the massage in Bismarck, North Dakota, and Mr. Catalyst contacts me about an article I had sent him in the New York Times on open relationships. And during our conversation in Denver, we spoke about a variety of things, including open relationships, because as a person who is attracted to both men and women, when I was much younger, I was a proponent of open relationships, and I still am, but it really depends. I just don't think the United States is really set up for ethical open relationships, to be honest, for the most part. And I agree with Jenny Holland, who says there are unicorns that work out, but a lot of times they don't. But anyway, I sent him an article that was in the New York Times, and I also sent him a short video by Susan Winter, and I thought that was one of the most well done videos. And if I can find those two links, I'll link them down below. The New York Times one is probably behind a paywall. The Susan Winter one, which I actually think is the better and more concise one, is not. And I absolutely 100 agree with what she says in this video. But anyway, he got back to me and said just something very brief about that article. And I want to jump in here and say, you know, once again, looking back on this 5 years later, we were definitely on two different wavelengths. So I was not necessarily discussing open relationships as some type of sexual kink. I was just discussing my experiences in a general way, not detailed way, and what I had learned from it, because I've learned a lot, and I have not been in an open relationship for a while. 10 years, I guess. So, and I take them very seriously. I don't think it's something to mess around with, quite honestly. But for someone like Mr. Catalyst, I'm sure that he was much more sexually oriented discussing this than I was. But he got back to me and I was like, great, we're back in contact again. I didn't think about it very much. I didn't respond right away. I just kind of continued on. I was driving from Bismarck, North Dakota to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We were in intermittent contact there, not a huge amount, but some. And I continued from Sioux Falls, South Dakota to Omaha, Nebraska. Now, I loved Omaha. Omaha was or is a really nice city. And I think that this is kind of important to mention. Once again, one of those small things, but this was significant. So I spent my time there in Omaha, Nebraska. I loved it. I actually went to a yoga class there. One of the things that I did as I was driving through the United States is every city that I would stop in, I would take a yoga class or some type of spinning class and just checking out the different studios. And I loved it. It was a great way to stay in shape going across the country. And many times I would take, one class a day since I had a lot of available time that I didn't usually have. So that was another thing that I did versus just being the basic tourist. And in that way, I was just able to see how people live locally, and that's something that always interests me. I'm not necessarily interested in the big tourist destinations. So I remember I'd taken a hot yoga class in Omaha, Nebraska. It was kind of packed, and I stayed in a beautiful place in Omaha, huge wraparound porch. And once again, I said this in a previous video, but Airbnb at that time was really, really reasonable, and I was able to take advantage of some really great prices. I think I paid like $50 a night total to stay in Omaha, Nebraska for 2 nights. It was great. So I will always treasure that time in these cities that I was able to visit that I haven't been back to since. So I was at the gas station loading up my car, filling up my car with gas, and you know how at the end, it just stops, right? And it's a digital one. Just it stopped, and I remember just hearing the stop, and I looked. The number on the gas gauge was 1313. 1313. And I knew I'm not a person that's into numbers so much, although I do believe a lot of they can communicate things, but I knew that number was significant, and I knew one of the 13s was me, and one of the 13s was Mr. Catalyst. And my first feeling was I was a little bit alarmed, I'm not gonna lie. And looking back on it now, I still actually think I am unraveling the meaning of 1313 at that Omaha, Nebraska gas station. And like I said, it wasn't like I was playing, you know how sometimes you put a little bit more in? No, it was just like, boom. Almost like, okay, I need to pay attention to this. I was very aware that this was something I needed to take notice of. In my heart, I was like, okay, this might represent volatility, and I need to be careful. And I wasn't wrong about that, but I think there is a lot more to that number than I could have ever understood at the time. I was trying to understand the magnitude of 1313 on this gas tank, but I knew I didn't have all the information. I had not even met up with this person. So I just kind of took note, And I took note of my heart when I saw that number, because it was a little bit intimidating. I'm not gonna lie.